Hey guys, this is New Sensei. I've already made a Q&A video last month covering the Olympic Games, but following our routine, I do want to address some of the questions raised in the previous Q&A video. First question from Cheryl. What finger tab do you use? Do you use a KSL Gold finger tab or a Win EZR? I actually use the Win 360. The Win EZR is my backup tab. Question from Dean, what backing do you use for your targets and how long would it last? At our club we use plastic pallet wrap. We fold them, we put into a press, we condense it and then we shove it into a wooden frame. These don't tend to last that long. The sensors get shot out. I can't estimate the number of arrows, but probably 1,000, 2,000 arrows around there, depending how frequently it's used. But they tend to be cut up quite easily, so it's not the best solution, but it's a very cheap solution. This requires a bit of elbow grease to make work. The other option is foam. We don't use foam. Some clubs do use foam, especially for the target centers. So the outside parts of the target are maybe plastic, but the middle part, which is where most arrows will go towards, hopefully, can be made from foam. These can be very expensive, but they can last quite a while. The other option we have at our club is Stramit. That's a very dense straw insulation material. It's cut to size. This can be very expensive, but it can definitely last for months, if not years. It tends to suffer in wet weather, but if you cover it, it's mostly okay. The problem we have with Stramit is that it does tend to be very heavy. So when we transition to mobile wheeling targets, the Stramit butts are a little hard to manage. But aside from that, those are the three options we have. Mr. Zurich asks, what are the equipment requirements for the Olympics? I've already covered this in detail in the Olympic Q&A, but just very quickly, the classification shot is freestyle recurve. That means you are allowed a recurve bow, and it must be a recurve. It can't be a long bow, and it can't be a compound bow. You are allowed stabilizers. You are allowed sights. The sights cannot have any magnification, and you must use a finger tab. You cannot use a mechanical release aid, and you cannot use any electronic aids on your bow. Special mention goes to the camouflage rule. According to the World Archery rules and guidelines, you aren't allowed to have any camouflage pattern on any piece of equipment. That includes your bow, your quiver, your accessories, and so on. This may not be policed at lower levels, but at the international levels, following World Archery rules, then that is the requirement in place for archers. Question from Zach, what recommendations do you have to make a backyard range safe? This is particularly important since you are shooting towards a neighbouring yard or neighbouring road. General rules keep in mind, make sure that your arrows can't go over, can't go under, and can't go through. I think if you follow these principles, you'll be okay. Overshoots do happen, not just from pointing too high, but from bouncing off the target and other things. So make sure that if you're shooting, you have a barrier or a fence or a mesh or a net or something to catch the arrow so it doesn't go over. Likewise, make sure that anything that you shoot under is blocked by something. And the shooting through part is very important. The reason is that people tend to underestimate what arrows can do. Arrows can go through things, just keep that in mind. You can definitely go through color bond or thin aluminium sheet metal. That's not a sufficient backstop. You need something to actually catch the arrow. Wood can stop arrows, but depending on your bow, you can punch through wood. So again, just be careful with how much protection you're putting behind your targets. So make sure there's enough backdrop. Make sure you have something which can stop an arrow. That way, that if any accidents happen, then at least you've taken sufficient safety measures. But I just cannot emphasize enough that please don't shoot towards someone's backyard. I mean, even though you might think it's safe, accidents always happen. And again, here in Melbourne, we did have an incident years ago where a competitive teenage shooter actually killed a person due to an accident in the backyard. So yeah, I'll cover backyard shooting in a different video, but just generally speaking, common sense safety. Don't point towards someone's house or property or any other people in the vicinity, and make sure that you've taken every reasonable measure to ensure that your space is safe. So those three things: over, under, and through. And otherwise, yeah, just use common sense. Dennis asks, can you explain the specifications of an arrow and how do you measure an arrow? The most important specification for an arrow is spine rating. The static spine is measured in a very specific industry standard, but just roughly speaking, basically the arrow is flexed. And the distance of that flex is measured, and that corresponds to a spine rating. Now, the actual measurement is millimeter inches, but different manufacturers would use different numbers for their arrows, but they all correspond to a spine rating. Again, aluminium arrows have a particular standard. Carbon arrows normally follow a particular standard, and it does vary between manufacturers, but most makers use very similar figures. You do sometimes see, especially for trad bows, arrows rated for specific poundages, and especially with the really cheap fiberglass eBay arrows, you may find that these arrows are fine from 20 to 45 pounds. This particular figure is bollocks. It's just a way to get people to say, oh yeah, I shoot 30 pounds, it should be okay. These arrows are far too stiff for that. But yeah, the actual measurement is static spine. There are other things as well, especially arrow weight and point weight and front of center and so on. The most important thing for buying arrows is spine. You have to consider your dynamic spine, more specifically. So the combination of your bow weight, your draw length and so on, and that way you get a much closer match to your bow. As for how to measure an arrow, firstly, never include the point in your measurement. Points come in different shapes and sizes, so it's never used to measure. The measurement is from the front of the shaft all the way down to the back of the arrow. Now, there are two general ways to measure an arrow. The industry standard is to measure from the front of the shaft to the throat of the nock, which is there. So that's your measurement, throat of nock to front of shaft. The other way which some people measure is shaft to shaft. So from one end to the back end of the shaft, not including the nock. So those are the two ways: either front of shaft to throat of nock, or front of shaft to end of shaft. It's very important to indicate which method you are using, otherwise your arrows may be cut incorrectly. Some shops will actually have a drop-down menu specifying which method you use. If not, either assume that they are using the nock to shaft, otherwise make sure you specify in your order what you are using to measure. Windy asked, do you prefer the Inno CXT or the Inno AXT? I actually haven't used the AXT before. I actually haven't seen one. I know what it is, but I haven't actually seen one in person, so I can't say if I prefer one or the other. I generally do prefer the carbon models, so the CXT has the right balance of weight for my particular preference. The only aluminium bows I've had at the high end are the Win AL1, which is a nice weighty, meaty riser, and the Hoyt bows like the Hoyt GMX, which again is a very nice chunky bow, feels nice and heavy, but depends on whether you prefer the balance of the Hoyt versus the balance of the Win. Mr. McBenney asks, I wear glasses and I've got weak sight in my right eye. Do I have to use a left-hand bow? The short answer is generally yes, you have to shoot left-handed if your right eye is weak. This isn't a matter of cross-dominance as much, but if you only have one functioning eye, and there are people with prosthetic eyes or blind in one eye, then you don't really have a choice. That means you have to switch hands and shoot with your opposite hand. So in your case, very likely you will have to switch to a left-hand bow. Katie Wrestling asks, is a bowstring required? The answer is strictly no. You can string a bow without a bowstringer, but the bowstringer is the easiest and safest method. Turstoff shared a post about trimming finger tabs to fit the size of your hand. I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm assuming yes. People do trim the leather around the tab for a perfect fit. It's not required for some people. The extra leather is very flimsy, so it's common for people to trim the leather to match exactly what they need. Finally, John asks, is archery viable for self-defense? In my opinion, while I think that a bow might be viable in a survival situation for the preppers out there, I don't think it's a good self-defense weapon. There are several reasons. The first one is the sheer fact that you can't carry it with you. I don't know what scenario you have in mind, but when you say self-defense, I'm either thinking personal defense, so I'm walking down the street, I'm at work, I'm going shopping, or it might be a home invasion scenario. And in both cases, I don't have a bow. That's a pretty big problem. When I think of good self-defense weapons, I'm thinking of things like firearms, pistols. People can carry, depending on your country, you may be an open carry, concealed carry. So you might have a firearm that can be used for self-defense. You might have a knife which you carry with you, or a stick, or a set of keys. That's the stuff that works with self-defense. Things you have on hand or carry with you that can be used to defend yourself. A bow is not on hand, and even if you're in the house, where's your bow? In your car, in the garage, in the back room. You're not going to have a bow on a ready rack ready to use. So very hard to imagine that a bow might be practical for home defense. That's the practical problem. There's also the fact that to use a bow for self-defense, you must actually be a good shot. This isn't the same as shooting a target 20 meters away. You're shooting at a threat that may be armed, that may be coming at you, and you have very little time to react. So unless you are a particularly well-trained combat archer, I do not think that you will effectively use a bow in a self-defense threatening situation. If someone's coming at you, I do not think that you'll be able to knock the arrow, pull it back and shoot, and actually hit the target, even at close distances. I highly doubt that. The third reason is arrows aren't that effective. I mean, really, if you look at the arrows that you have now, if you use hunting broadheads, that may be more devastating, but arrows can be stopped by anything really. Even thick clothing can really stop an arrow from getting through. It can deflect and bounce off someone's jacket, for example. You don't need a bulletproof vest to stop an arrow. So unless you're using hunting broadheads, which will inflict a lot of bleeding, and they'll still bleed out after like about half an hour to an hour, so it's not like you can instantaneously kill someone. This isn't a movie where you get hit with an arrow and you drop dead. The simple fact of the matter is arrows aren't very good at killing. They don't inflict enough damage, which means that the person who's attacking you would not be stopped. If someone's coming at you with a knife, they get hit by an arrow, unless you hit a particular vulnerable point like the eyes or the neck or something else, they're not going to stop. So the bow, I think in my opinion, is not an effective weapon. The arrows you use are not effective weapons. I think you have far better options with using your bare hands rather than using a bow. So that's my opinion. I do consider this to be the question of the month, so thanks for the question, John. And hopefully I answered it. Again, people might disagree with me, but I don't think that bows are viable for self-defense. Anyway, those are the questions for this month. As usual, if you have any more questions, ask below or send me a post via Facebook. I am happy to say that we have finally broken through winter. That means more sunlight, longer days, warmer weather, which means hopefully more chance to shoot and more time to make archery videos for you. This is New Sensei. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.